Hello guys, this month you are going to be walking through with me while I make a commission. This commission is going to be of So Desu's standing animal plush. My client wants the cat made. She wants it made out of terry cloth. I have already gone through and pre-washed this terry cloth with I used some vinegar and some fabric softener. The reason why I use fabric softener is we don't want this terry cloth to be absorbent, whereas with normal towels you would want it to be absorbent, and the fabric softener, those oils, will keep the towel from being absorbent. So these towels are super soft and luscious feeling because I've already gone and pre-washed them. I also have prepared my pattern pieces. All of them are cut out. Because of the design on the cat that she wanted, I ended up having to make a couple of applique pieces. I went ahead and already created those. Maybe in the future I'll go through my methods on how I create new applique pieces for different patterns that I do. And I also have transferred all of the applique that we're going to be using today onto some fusible web, and I've already cut them out into the different colors that we're going to be doing today. So I have never used this fusible web applique on terry cloth before, so I'm hoping it goes well. If not, it is a very big towel and I don't need very much of it. So hopefully this will go good. So my fabric store stopped carrying terry cloth, and I was frankly feeling a little impatient and didn't want to wait to order some in. But my local Target was having a sale, so we went ahead and got some towels from Target. The client liked the colors that I was able to find there, so that's just what we went with. Now, of course, these towels have these differently textured stripes. I'm probably going to start by cutting these stripes off. Probably I'll just take the remnants of these stripe bits and turn them into washcloths and either sell them or keep them. I don't know yet. In the process of making these new applique patterns, I did end up drawing on the original pattern piece, and so because I want to keep the grain of these towels going in the same direction, I'm going to be referencing this piece as I am ironing down these applique pieces that I have transferred onto the fusible web. I'm going to be referencing it as I go to make sure that everything is going in the same direction. Okay, I noticed that as I ironed, the iron did kind of mess up the nap of the towel. The nap is going this direction. Around where I ironed the fusible web down, but it looks like where the fusible web is, the nap is still secure, so it looks like I am losing a little bit of the usable towel outside of it, but not very much. The rest of these fusible web pieces will be super easy to knock out because these are all just going on regular 100% cotton, or as I call it, quilting cotton. It's the cotton that you find in the quilting section of your local fabric store. Okay, I have all of my applique pieces, all of the fusible web attached to all of the fabric, and you will notice that I have not cut into the cream colored terry cloth quite yet, and that is because terry cloth frays really bad. So to mitigate that as I go along, I'm going to be cutting pieces as I use them. I'm going to be following the instructions of the pattern as I go. I try to stick to them as closely as possible, but sometimes my methods deviate from Chloe Knight's methods, and so I usually kind of stop and write on the paper instructions. I do like to print out my instructions so that I can write on them for future reference, because anytime I reach a confusing part, sometimes I need to write it down for myself, and it just saves me time in the future. Okay, before I really start getting into this, I went ahead and cut out some test pieces from the scrap, from the salvage. This is fusible webbed down. I'm probably gonna have to iron it down one more time. I know that fusible web doesn't get the edges down, that's why I sew around the edges anyway. That is the point of applique. But I just kind of did a test piece here just to make sure that the tension on my machine is correct for these materials, and also for this interfacing that I am going to be using with it. Alright, doing this test patch has really helped me nail down the settings. This was the first one I ran, and for my liking, the stitch length was just a little bit too long. It's letting those fibers peek through. So for the next one, I closed in that stitch length, and I liked it a lot, but I felt like it just wasn't quite grabbing onto the edge of the yellow terry cloth as much as I wanted to. So I widened my stitch width by 1. And I think this is what we're going to use as far as trying to stitch this terry cloth down onto terry cloth. And this terry cloth does not like to accept my fusible web hardly at all. See how I just kind of sewed a little pocket? So I'm going to have to work around that as much as possible. It might take a few tries getting each individual piece down, but I think I should be able to get it to work. And this is how it looks on the back. Looks pretty good. So as I'm trying to iron on this first layer of fusible web applique, I cannot get the heat of my iron to penetrate this thick towel. So I'm gonna pivot and use some PVA glue to hold these together, just to get it so that it will be adhered to each other in the middle. I don't care so much about the edges, because the edges will be sewn down later. So I'm going to put some white glue in between and leave it pressed between some books for probably overnight. Okay, so before we continue with this project, I do have a quick announcement. Doesn't really affect you guys that much, but it makes my quality of life a lot easier. I have gotten some new equipment to use when I'm filming these videos. As you can tell by the adjusted camera angle, I now have a tripod. So look, both hands, it's great. You also might notice this little clicker in my videos as I'm using them. This is just a Bluetooth button that allows me to start and stop videos as I go. And yeah, this will also come quite in handy. Anyway, back to this commission. We are finally getting started on the applique. I have already gotten out all of the colors of thread I will be using, and we'll see if I can get this time-lapse software I downloaded to work, because I would like to try out doing time-lapses for the sewing portions. So there might be a voiceover, there might not. We'll see what happens. So I have my machine threaded, and with the first color I'm going to be using, which is a cream color. It just looked very nice as a transition between this off-white and this yellow. So that's what I'm going to be using around these areas, and you'll kind of see what colors I choose as I go through. I am going to be now trying for some time-lapse footage. We will see how that goes. I am really hoping that it goes well, because if it doesn't and I lose all the footage or it just doesn't work out, I'm going to have barely anything to work with when it comes to editing this video. So hopefully I can get technology to work with me for a day. It doesn't typically like to, but let's try. Okay, so I have finished all of the applique on this piece. I still have 2 more pieces that I have to applique because the back pieces of the head also have this yellow applique to it. But I have reached one of my favorite parts of the process, which is tearing off the tearaway backing. And I thought that we could do that together this time, since I have 2 hands free with my new tripod. So kind of what I'll do is just try and find good places to rip this tearaway off at. And you'll see that some of these threads I've left long, and that is just so that later as I'm sewing those seams, they'll end up being a little bit more secure in the end. There's a whole piece. Sometimes pieces like this I will save for, like, some of my plushies have really small faces or just like small details out in the middle of nowhere. So this is good for like just like a random nose and mouth. So I will keep these larger pieces, but the smaller pieces will end up being tossed. And sometimes you gotta kind of pinch it from both sides of where I have appliqued to get it to want to tear away. But for the most part, this is actually coming out quite easily. That's a piece that can be saved. Okay. Okay, let's try. So very satisfying. It's not very often that I get to like really truly rip into things. You gotta be careful for a lot of things when it comes to sewing, and this is one of the things where I can afford to be a little bit less careful. Of course, especially around these ends of the applique, even though I backstitched, I'm going to be kind of careful to make sure that I don't start unraveling them. Okay, so I think at this point it'll be a good idea to carefully, with small scissors, cut the face like so, and then kind of make a pocket and cut out this way. Careful not to cut myself or the fabric below. And then I'll pick somewhere in the middle to start doing the ripping this way. And that way. There it goes. There we go. Rip across the top of the mouth, and there we go. This piece is completely ready, and we can go ahead and set it off to the side. Since I know from doing the front face piece that the fusible web applique just doesn't work through this terry cloth, I am going to be foregoing the applique, and I will instead be tracing my pieces onto freezer paper. This is one of the first methods I learned on how to applique before I really had my hands on some fusible web applique. This is what I would use. It's a good cheap method for when you're on a budget. It's a good starter method just to kind of learn the basics of it. And the reason why I'm using the freezer paper to cut these out instead of just cutting out these pattern pieces that I have drawn here, and then cutting them, using them like regular pattern pieces on terry cloth, is I kind of want to preserve the shape, and I know I could just trace it onto another piece of paper and cut that out, but I also feel like using the freezer paper will give me nice clean cuts around these edges, so that's what I'm gonna do. Okay, I have finished all of the applique pieces. Yay! It is super smooth sailing from here on out. No more tediousness. I don't mind tedious tasks like a lot of people do. I find them rather soothing and calming, but it is definitely nice to be past it. You will notice that I went ahead and did the applique of these on the same piece of interfacing, and that's because I won't be getting to these pieces until later in the process, as all of So Desune's patterns usually go, and I want to keep them together, and kind of what I'm going to do is just fold them over each other. This will hopefully minimize the amount of fraying that goes on while I am working on other parts of the project. as you saw earlier, just now, I did the first step of sewing, which is this top dart here. Next, I need to do these 3 bottom darts, but I have not marked them yet. So I'm going to use my pattern piece as reference, as well as my disappearing ink marker. Here it is. And the way I like to do it is to mark a dot at where I want to aim for to be the end of the dart. And I do that by just kind of lifting the pattern piece so that I can kind of see through it to where like I can see the lines of the pattern through the paper. I'm going to go ahead and do that for all 3 darts. This disappearing ink marker, it has ink that is dissolvable in air and water. And I've noticed that, I haven't tested it for the water solubility, but I've noticed that for air solubility, it disappears in about 5 days. The finished front head piece all done. This can now be set aside with the other applique finished pieces, which are the backs of the head, and now we get to move on to the ears. Sewn. I'm going to go ahead and kind of test flip one, see how well I can get it to flip on its own. If I have issues, I will probably use my pinking shears, and because I'm worried about this fraying, I might end up having to use some fray check on these edges. We'll see what happens. Okay. You know what? It looks like it flips pretty easily. I think if I just work it a little bit with my fingers to kind of get it to press how I want it to, maybe leave it under a couple books overnight. No, I think I can get it to work how it is. And I don't think I'll need to do any fray check. It should be fine on its own so long as I leave the seam allowance how it is. It does fray, but I don't think it'll fray enough that it'll start coming undone entirely. because if I compare it to like how much like my test piece has frayed on this edge, it's frayed a little bit, but not a ton. And it's really mostly just been the fuzzies coming out and not the fabric itself coming undone. So I think that these are pretty safe to leave as is. I think it's a lot easier for me to tell in real life, like the actual line of the fabric itself compared to the fuzzy. So when I was sewing, if it looked like I was taking too much seam allowance, it was just the fuzzy that you were seeing and not where I actually cut the fabric itself, if that makes sense. But these ears are done, and looks like the next step is to baste them onto the front of the head. Well, it is too thick to go through my machine, so I'm going to have to baste these on by hand. I'm probably going to use a round stitch for this. I really hope that this is not a theme through the rest of the project, because this is going to take me a really long time if I have to hand sew it. I'm really hoping that I can baste these on, and then later when I put the two halves of the head together, that it'll be a lot more amicable with me. I just couldn't get this thickness of, it's essentially 4 layers of this terry cloth to go under my machine. But I'm hoping that later it'll kind of work with me. Okay, I have these hand sewn on. It's looking like there are going to be quite a few places during this pattern where I will have to forego the sewing machine, unfortunately. But for pretty simple things like the darts and whatnot, I should be able to use the sewing machine, and for that you'll see time-lapse footage. For the hand sewing, I haven't yet figured out a good way to set up my camera for that. So I'll just show you the end result this way, of any time I'm done hand sewing pieces on. I like to work like in my lap whenever I'm hand sewing, and I just don't know of a good way to set up a camera angle for that. So I think this is how we're gonna do that for this episode. So yeah, here's the ears basted onto there. Like I said, I just used a round stitch. That should be good until I get to the part where I attach the back to the front. Hopefully I'll be able to use my sewing machine, but it's looking like I'll probably have to hand sew that as well, and if I do, I'll probably do a back stitch just that it's more secure. I have the head done. I did mess up at one point and have to seam rip something out, but it was super quick and easy. And I did end up having to sew all the way around the two parts of the head together. It was thick in some places, like thick with 4 C's. But I got through it. I didn't even break any of my hand sewing needles, which is great. Got to break in my new pair of hemostats, which was fun. Sometimes trying to get through all those layers with the hand needle was a little stubborn, So I had some help with my new hemostats and of course my fancy thimble that I've got. It wasn't fun doing all of that hand sewing, but I'm hoping that this is kind of the last of it, because the rest of the body is just gonna be the white color. So in theory, I shouldn't be needing to add all this thickness with the applique, and I don't think there's really too much more basting except for the tail, so maybe around the tail area I'll have to hand sew, but I think for the rest of it I can get away with machine sewing. Let's hope. saw there, I went ahead and made the arms. Here's what they look like finished. Just in case I don't end up getting and doing a voiceover over the time-lapse parts, you might have noticed that I kind of went back and redid some parts. The first one I did, I just didn't quite get the curve as pronounced as I wanted it to, because these are kind of supposed to look like perfectly little rounded nubbins at the end here, and I just felt like my first attempt on it just wasn't quite right, so thankfully I didn't need to pull anything out to fix it as far as stitches, but I just went through and re-intensified that curve once again. The second one was a little bit off, but I felt like with how fluffy the fabric was, I didn't really need to go back and do a touch-up on it, and I was right. These are both basically identical as they can be. I am human, you know, that's just how it is. But yeah, so the next part of the instructions is more hand sewing, and like I explained earlier in the video, I just don't have the setup to film the hand sewing, but I will get back to you once the hand sewing is done, and we will see where we're at from there. So as you saw earlier, I finished up the body except for the feet yet. You might have seen that my machine did have a little bit of a struggle around this crotch area. I kind of essentially had to use the hand wheel to walk it across that area. I might go through and reinforce it with some hand stitching. The machine I'm using has like a security system in it, I think, to keep it from like jamming itself too badly or like breaking needles and hurting anybody. So, and it's because it's an older machine, this machine is actually 24 years old. Because it's an older machine, I think that the sensor on the security system is starting to get like too sensitive. That might just be my opinion though. Definitely when this machine goes back to its rightful owner very soon, I will be letting her know those issues. She has a regular repair guy that she takes it to, and maybe he could look into that sensor for her. So yeah, that's my machine issues that I'm dealing with. Another thing that is concerning me at this point, and I'm not sure if I should be concerned, is just how like angled these like the ends of the legs are here. In the pictures in the pattern instructions, it doesn't appear that angled in that direction. It appears to be a lot more flat out. I cut the pieces as accurately as I can, and as far as I can tell, they're symmetrical. So I just don't see why it would be doing this. Maybe I just didn't cut enough of a curve here. So we'll see how this turns out. It should be fine. Because the only thing I can think of is like the inner edge is like a little bit too long. I might end up having to kind of trim by the inner edge just to make it like more flat so that the circle will fit on there better, the circle of the foot. So we will see what happens, but this is kind of where I'm at right now as far as a progress update. So as you saw there, the feet were put on with actually no issues, surprisingly. I did trim up one of the feet, I can't remember which one, but one of them just was looking a little jagged. And this should be ready to flip. I figured I might as well do that here with you. This is one of my favorite parts, is flipping it, because then you get to see all the finished seams. And I did put some fray check in the crotch area just as a little bit of reassurance. With this fabric, actually, I can kind of be a little messy with the fray check without worrying about it, because the inside of the head where I fray checked, where I hand sewed, it did end up being crunchy, but you can't even tell from the outside. So I learned from that, and I am now gonna be a little bit less careful with the fray check, at least with this terry cloth, now that I'm aware of that. Ugh, gotta get this other foot out. It's going, it's just being a pain in the butt. Almost got it. There it goes. Almost. There it is. Push them feet out. And this little body is ready for a head. Alright. I do kind of like that. It's an interesting body shape. I've done a lot of sew desune patterns in the past before, and so like I'm kind of really used to the style and how things go compared to the other patterns I've done in the past. This one is very different. Her standing animal pattern is very different compared to a lot of the other ones that I've worked with up to this point, but it has definitely been a very fun challenge, and I will probably be making this again in the future. Okay, so I have brought the head back. I have already stuffed the body in there. Basically the next and last step is to hand sew around the neck together. I'll be pinning and sewing that, and when we come back, I'll probably go ahead and turn it with you again, just because I think that part is the most satisfying part of making plushies, is when you get to turn them right side out. It's so cool. Okay, so as you can see by my hand sewing tools that I have strewn about my workstation, I have gone through and hand sewn the whole neck all the way around. I've gone through and checked my stitching to make sure that there aren't really any big gaps or holes, that I've gotten everything to the best of my ability, and I have. think there might be a few areas that might need reinforced once I have it turned and stuff, but I will deal with that later. I'm going to go ahead and take my fray check around this edge just to be sure that it is going to hold up and last. And from what I've found out with this material is I can be really generous with the fray check and it won't really affect the outside of the plush that much. So just do a quick line all the way around there. And then I'm going to be careful to, when I flip it, to not stick my fingers in that because it's essentially super glue. There we go. Got the little legs out. Oh, come on now. I don't want to stick my fingers in that. There we go. I have an arm. I have 2 arms. Now I just gotta flip the head right side out. It's a little stiff because of the applique, but aha, here we are. There is that body. Oh my goodness. It is adorable. Okay. Just kind of checking a few areas, making sure that everything is kind of lining up how it should, and it looks like it is. This looks great. This looks awesome. So at this point, the customer has requested that it have a weighted pouch inside of it. So I am going to set this aside, make the weighted pouch, and then we can start stuffing. So I am now to the point where I am ladder stitching up this, and I kind of want to show you something here. If you can see the threads right there. As I pull, it'll, like if I were to pull on this thread, it would tighten it, but then it would come right back to this position. That tells me that I have stuffed it to just the right amount. From what I've found is when you go to ladder stitch, when you're about halfway done, if you can pull on your thread and it will tighten up really nicely, but then it'll loosen out, like so, that means that you have stuffed it just the right amount for it to be nice and soft and plush and huggable, but still full. So, just wanted to show you guys that real quick. As you saw, that was the making of the tail. I forgot to record cutting it out, but there was the making of the tail. I also didn't record turning it right side out because that was a little bit finicky. Had to get in there with my with my hemostats to get it to come through, but now I can stuff it. It should just take a couple minutes, and then I just need to hand sew it on, and then this plushie will be ready to go in the mail. So I think that this is kind of the end of the video.